Auburn Community Television in this episode of Meet the Artist. Meet the Artist is supported by the North Auburn Artists to introduce artists in our local community. Today we are at the Newcastle Packing Shed, located in Newcastle, California. We will be visiting with some of the artists here and seeing their artwork that is showcased in this beautifully restored historical building. There are 12 artists here with working studios. There's so much to see, so little time, so let's get started. Our first guest is Joyce Williams. Joyce is a pastel artist. I always love talking to artists that do pastels because we share a pastel passion. But today we're going to start with talking a little bit about the Newcastle Packing Shed and this incredible gallery, because Joyce is the founder of what we see here today. Joyce, thank you so very much for having us.
Thank you for being here, Lucinda.
Now, I introduced you as the founder of what we see today, because I think that best describes what you started here.
Well, it started with me, you're right. And there were other businesses in here. Gradually, as my friends took up the empty spaces for their studios, little by little, after 10 years, where everybody else moved out and we've got all the artists here. So it's a gathering of artists and we help each other. It's a great group of, I call them my art sisters.
Well, I can certainly see that. You certainly get a feel for that when you walk into the packing shed.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
Now, when you first came, it still had the lobby area that we have, but that didn't have artwork in it, because it wouldn't have been a gallery at that point.
No, it was a mess. It had old furniture, and I think there were discards, and little by little, gradually, we got rid of them one by one and kept what worked for us.
Well, I think it's great because it's a perfect space now, because your artwork is displayed there. You have a nice little seating area for people to come and just relax and enjoy the space.
And we do, and they do.
Now, the other thing I like about the way this is configured is that all of the studios kind of open out into that lobby area. And so it makes it very inviting.
Hopefully that's what we like, is people to feel invited and be able to walk into the studios and see the artists working and view their work.
And what's unique about Newcastle Packing Shed's gallery is that these are working studios. So when the people come in, it's not just coming in and seeing the artwork. They can actually come and speak to each one of the artists.
Right. And it works. It's nice to be interrupted sometimes by people, and sometimes not so nice, as you probably know.
Do you ever have someone just come in and watch you?
Once in a while. Usually young people. They like to watch you.
Now, I understand you also do classes here.
Yes.
And do each of the artists hold classes, or just a few of them?
A few of us.
And if somebody wants to find out about those classes, how do they go about doing that?
Well, we haven't really advertised it, but we have a board in the common area telling when the classes are, and I think each of us that give classes have it on our brochures so that when people come in, they usually inquire if they're interested. Do you give classes? And we answer with whatever we teach.
Now, and what's also good is that you have actually a classroom that is part of this overall facility.
Right.
And you just finished up repainting that.
Yes, we did. It was a very dark, dated maroon and forest green, and it didn't show the paintings off to advantage at all. So between the 12 of us, we talked about it back and forth, and finally came up with neutral off-white, and it's helped a lot. Much nicer.
That's what I also like, is that you can see the artistic touch in the entire building. So this wasn't some company that came in and set this all up and said, we're going to set this up as an art community.
No.
You guys did this.
And we have 12 ideas. 12 people and 12 ideas of how to do it. So it takes some negotiating sometimes, but all in all, I think it's worked out very well.
Oh, I think it's absolutely beautiful because the building itself, you have kept the integrity of the building. The colors are so consistent
That's
with
important.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And they are also perfect colors for showing off the artwork. So absolutely
Good.
Excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I
Lucinda.
love coming here.
I know. You need to come more often.
I should. So now let's talk a little bit about your artwork.
All right.
We had previously interviewed you, and I so enjoyed it because you do more of the traditional pastel
Mhm.
work, and you also, unlike the way I created my own method of using pastels, I think you use a more of a traditional approach to
Mhm.
them. But the difference, and that's what shows how you can do so much with pastels.
Yes, it's a wonderful medium.
It is,
I know.
and sometimes I tell people I feel like it's the redheaded stepchild of the art industry, or
You could say that.
yeah. But it is absolutely a perfect medium, I think.
Oh, I do too. You can wash your hands and walk away and come back a year later
Exactly.
and work on that piece that
Well,
you can't do with watercolor and oil.
But your work exemplifies just the perfection that can be achieved in this medium.
Thank you.
One of the pieces that I really, really love is the one that's just right over your shoulder there.
One of my seascapes. I love doing seascapes because, I don't know, the movement of the water, the action, and it's where I like to be.
Yes. Well, it's the colors, too, that you have just brought into that with the way you have the variation in the sands and then just the difference in the water. Now, the one behind you was one that you had done previous, and then you brought it forward to work on it again. Is that correct?
Correct. And that's the beauty of pastel.
I know it. You could actually let it sit for that period of time.
I started it probably about a year ago, and I was never quite satisfied with it. I knew it needed something, and I just couldn't figure it out. So I put it aside, hung it over there hung it to dry, so to speak, and got it out a month or so ago. And I knew what I needed to, some of the things that I needed to do. And then one of our artists suggested something, and I did that. And I think now it's pretty well. I was thinking of putting figures in it, but maybe not.
Now, I love the fact you said one of the artists here made a suggestion. And that is what's nice about being in this art community.
It's wonderful. We critique each other and either take the advice if we feel it's right or not. And we do that back and forth, and it's very helpful to have other people's eyes look at it. They see things that we don't. So it's a benefit.
And nobody takes offense either way.
No.
That's because you have such a great cohesive group here.
And because we want that advice, that expertise that they have that they can share.
Now, you have some other pictures that we're going to look at, and one of the ones is your portrait work. It's an example of your portrait work.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a young girl. And can you tell me how you came upon this particular subject for this pastel?
She was with a group of children, and she seemed to be the oldest, maybe a teenager. And they were walking away from me at I think it was a fair. And just as I got the camera up, they were such a cute little bunch because she was holding onto their hands. And just as I got the camera out to take a picture of them, she turned around, looked over her shoulder at me, and gave me that attitude look. And so when I started to do the painting, I decided I would just do her portrait and not the other children, which I had planned on in the beginning. So that's where she came from, and I called her Glory.
And you most definitely caught that attitude.
I think so.
I love the texture of her skin. You can just see how beautiful her skin was and just the tones that you were able to achieve in it, too.
Well, thank you. I worked on brown paper, and I used the brown paper as her skin color. So,
and then you just came in and kind of enhanced what was there. That is
Exactly.
absolutely amazing. I actually did an experiment with colored paper, and I decided that's not the route for me.
no, yours show better on white.
I think so. I definitely, we always try
We'll
things
get you
out.
to reach out one of these days.
Maybe. maybe. I am reaching out because I'm doing pan pastels now.
That's right. Good for you. Good
Okay,
for you.
so I'm stretching my
And I'm
wings
trying
a
to
little
do an abstractor too. I have a difficult time with it.
This will be really
Difficult.
interesting. So I'll talk with you in a year from now.
All
We'll
right.
see what you can show me.
Okay.
Now,
Sounds
one
good.
other that I want to talk about today, because I love the colors that you used in it, and it is just over my shoulder. This here.
To uncurl it.
Uncurl it, because you said something about this particular paper.
I love the paper. It's UArt.
I'm getting pastels on it.
I think UArt 500, and I love it, except for the fact that it curls. Once it's framed, it doesn't, but I have to clip it down, as you can see on the board.
The colors in this are just so
Thank you.
intense. I
Thank
love
you.
it.
Well, this was a little abstract
Yes.
from what I usually
I was
do.
going to say, you've pushed your colors here. I love the purple,
And it's my niece's truck,
and it is called
their place in Carma's truck.
Carma's truck. I really do love it, and I love the way you've depicted the various colors in the grass here, and the.
It's a reach for me, but
It is. No, it's beautiful.
it came over well.
Okay, so see, you are coming over to the dark
Yeah.
side.
The dark side.
Well, Joyce, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you
and
for coming, Lucinda.
Thank you for giving us such a fabulous place, the Newcastle Packing Shop.
Happy to do it.
It
We're
is-
all happy to do that.
It is such a joy to be here.
Good. We can
Thank you.
come more often and we'll paint together.
We may try that,
Okay.
and then not try to convince you to use pan pastels. I know. Not
I
a
did
chance.
try them. I did try them. But I just like these square, big, hunky, great American artworks pastels. They're my favorite.
And I think that, once we find something we really
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that is true.
I've gone from watercolor to oil to pastel, and I'm stuck on pastel. Love it.
Well, next we're going to be visiting with two more artists who share a studio. So let's go see what they're doing. We are now visiting the studio of Pat Stoddard Aragon. Pat is a Western artist, and she does both pastel work as well as oils. And we have such an incredible variety here. So I'm so excited to visit with you.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that we're here.
Oh, me too.
Now, what I'm going to start it right out is that just complimenting you on the way you capture just every aspect of the horses and the cattle that you do. It's absolutely amazing. Is this because you are very familiar with them? Is this part of your life?
Very familiar. Yeah, I've always been surrounded by horses and cattle. And I lived in Wyoming and we raised cattle. We had a cattle ranch. And so I'm very familiar with all their muscles and the way their hair goes. And so I try to put that in my paintings if I can.
Oh, you absolutely do. You can just see with every hair and the way it lays, and then it comes over that muscling. And it doesn't make any difference if they're standing still or in a run. You always are able to capture that. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I had a lot of experiences when I was younger, ranching with cattle and horses, and some of them were pretty exciting, and so I want to share some of those experiences. So that's how come my paintings have a lot of cows and horses and sagebrush and things like that.
Well, that's what's so great about art, because you are able to share a part of the experiences in your life to the viewer when they come in and see your work.
I hope so. Yeah.
Now, one of the paintings that you're working on right now is right behind us, and I'm so glad that you've let us actually look at it and see it in process, because I'm always marvel at the process, and I know everybody's always wondering, how do you get started and then end up with where you do? So let's talk a little bit about the one that you have on the easel and where you are right now with this particular painting.
Sure. Well, I took it with my phone because just the other morning I was looking out my window and here comes a cow down the hill with a new calf. And I took a picture with my phone and I thought that would make a neat painting. So when I was over here just yesterday, I sketched it onto a canvas that I had.
What do you use to do the actual sketch?
Just stick charcoal.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And that way, if I don't like my marks, I can wipe it out real easy.
Oh, I
Make
see.
another one.
I see. And
Make another
so
one.
now, and that doesn't muddy up with the actual oil. Is this oil that you're using? Or?
Yes, it's oil.
So
Yes.
oil doesn't pick that up and it doesn't affect it.
Well, what I do is I take a mixture of thin oil and odorless turpentine, and I go over my lines, and I've only started to go over these here, and that sets it. Or I can use spray fixative, but I usually just go over it with a brush with turpenoid or turpentine, and it fixes the charcoal so that it doesn't mix with your oil paint when you put your oil over it. It's set.
Because that's a problem that I've had, because I started out doing graphite, and it's been really hard for me to move from the graphite to another medium. So even when I do my pastels, I do my sketch in a graphite.
Yeah.
And that graphite gets picked up easily.
Yeah.
And I'm now trying to transition to actually do the sketches with pastel pencils. And hoping
if you have
that
a can
would,
of workable fixative, you just give it a spray and it sets it, and then there you are.
then I wouldn't have that problem.
It wouldn't bleed, right?
Now, do you put any type of an undercoat on your oil paintings?
This is a undercoat. It's just a thin wash of a color, and then after it dries, you paint over it. It depends upon what mood you're wanting your painting to reflect. And this is orange, but most of the colors that are going to be finished will be greens and browns. And this will come through just a little here and there.
And that's what I find amazing, is that when you are doing the artwork, and I'm always so impressed with the artists, because you actually have to kind of peel back what you're seeing to this base color and then build it back up.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an amazing vision.
It is. Yeah. If you want something to be sunshiny, you do your underpainting in a warm, sunshiny color. And then there's little spots where your oil painting doesn't cover completely, and those little spots shine through with sunshine. And it gives a good feeling to your painting, if that's what you're after.
Now, with the oil painting, the reason I've always avoided it, because it always seems like it takes so long to dry. Now, when you do the undercoat, because you've mixed it with something, does that dry a little bit faster than if you're just when you use the actual oils?
Yes, it's a thin mixture with turpenoid, or you can use a drier medium like liquid or that, and it makes it dry faster. Sometimes I just get a whole bunch of canvases out and give them all a coat of stuff and then set them aside, and then they're ready. When I want to paint something, they'll be all dry and ready.
Now, I noticed on this, then, is that you've now got another layer of the cow. And so there'll be even more layers that are going to come in on top of that to actually get what we see is typical of your work, such incredible detail. Yeah,
this is mostly just showing me where the darker areas of the painting will be. It's like an undercoat. And the places like here and here will be a lighter value. So this just shows me my darks.
Well, and also you have the little calf that is sketched out here. You can already see the movement in that calf with the walk just through your sketch.
He was a cutie.
Yeah, the cow's really cute.
Yeah.
So now you have something to show us that is finished product, so that we can actually see when you go from this point and what you end up with after you've put on all of these particular layers.
I have a lot, yes.
So one of the pieces that we're going to be talking about is the one that you have on the wall, which looks like they're herding some cattle. And I understand there's a story behind that one.
There's stories behind every one of my paintings, and this painting was of our neighbor who had his cattle in with ours and on the open range, and so we had to go gather them in one fall, and he went with us. He's 84. his old horse was just ancient, and his old dog. And that guy, he was an Indian, he was a Shoshone Indian. And this was all on the Shoshone Reservation. And his name was Charlie. And he rode all day, every day, when we were gathering cows for 10 hours, 14 hours a day. I mean, he was hard to keep up with.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is Charlie, an old red, his horse, and Ziggy, his old dog. And I had to paint it.
And you know, this is a scene that anybody that's worked on any type of a ranch has seen repeatedly, because we're always moving the cattle from one field to another, or bringing them up from the upper pastures down to the lower pastures. So as we were just talking about, is that you are really painting something that is timeless.
I hope so.
Well, and even though there's a lot of technology that's changed the ranching experience, there's still certain activities that they do every single day, and it's kind of nice to see the paintings that are depicting sometimes modern people in the saddle, and I know a lot of your work have people both past and present, but that does show how timeless it is.
Yeah, and it kind of immortalized old Charlie.
Well, you can see part of your soul in this too, and your love. It's all around us when we look at your work.
Thank you.
Now we're also going to talk about your pastels, because I did mention that you do the pastels, and you have a couple of pastels that we're going to talk about. So why don't we hold up the first one, and it is this one. And this one I understand that you won an award for.
This is a giclée print of the one that
Yes.
I did, which was larger. Yes, I won an award. I was thrilled.
Tell me the story behind this one.
The story behind this one is we had to take our cattle 20 miles in front of the horse. You had to ride 20 miles. And then the last few miles were up a very steep mountainous trail, and the cows didn't want to go, and you had to yell a lot and push them up to the top. And finally, when they got to the top, there was beautiful meadows and springs, and they were all happy then. But we were tired. And so this is called the rest stop. And after we got the cows to the top, we all got off the horses and sat down and just rested. But then it was 20 miles back to the ranch after this. So.
And do you ride the horses then back that whole 20 miles? Or
Yes. Yes.
That's a lot of riding
Those
in
long,
one day.
hard days.
That is. Well, I love this, and I love the mountains. And is this, again, where was this?
In Wyoming.
In Wyoming. Yeah, Montana, what is it? Is it Wyoming or Montana is supposed to be the big sky country?
Montana.
Well, you know what? Wyoming has big skies.
It
too.
sure does.
When I was going through it, I said the same thing about even my home state. I go, we have big skies too. So now this next one that is another giclée print, and this is of, and I love the detail, and this is what we were talking about, what you're able to capture with, you can see their coat and just still see the muscling in this horse. So what is this one called?
Power.
Oh, well, just perfect for this one.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about how this one caught your eye and why you did this painting.
I did this painting especially for the Draft Horse Classic.
I'm going to have you hold that one, sorry.
The Draft Horse Classic Draft Horse show that they have every year in Grass Valley. And this horse was a young horse, but when I went to see him at the ranch, he did this fantastic trot and just shook the ground, and I tried to get that into a portrait of him, and so I called it Power. He's a Brabant stallion, which is like a Belgian.
Well, you can just see the intense muscling in him as he's coming along. Absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
And you do have the original that's still here in your studio as well.
Yes.
So There is so much to see here in Pat's studio, and she has such an amazing eye when it comes to painting the cattle and the horses, and it really is a venture to the ranch where she grew up and did a lot of your adult living as well.
Yes.
Well, we certainly appreciate you bringing that to us, and thank you so much for being with us today.
I appreciate you being here too. Thank you.
So our next time visitor will be Rick Watson. Rick also shares a studio here with Pat, and he is also an oil painter, and you will see we're going to be doing something a lot different than Pat's work. Our next guest is Rick Watson. Rick is also located here at the Newcastle Packing Shed, and he shares a space with Pat Aragon. Rick does a totally different style of oil paintings, and I think you're going to find his work very interesting. And I love the fact that Pat and Rick share this studio space. So, Rick, you are an abstract artist.
Pretty much, yes. I enjoy abstract painting. I do some landscape work too, but I like to do that outside, but mostly I do abstract.
Now, you have one that's on the easel behind us, and this is one that you're working on right now. And this looks like it's a portrait.
It's a portrait of Anne Hathaway, the actress, and it's a very rough sketch at this point. I've got about, maybe 30 minutes into it, and so there's a lot more work to do.
Now, when you do the starting point like this, I noticed that you don't seem to have any type of a wash or undercoating on this. You're going right on the canvas.
Right. This was a charcoal sketch, and I'm just beginning the underpainting right now.
I see. Okay, so that's what we're seeing as it's going
Right.
on all around it.
Right.
And now, will you go in over with the face and put an undercoating on that as
Yes,
well?
I will.
And so you will be doing not just blanketing, putting one color on. You're going to be as you're going through it.
Yeah, it's basically raw sienna, but it will be doing different values. And so starting that process of putting the values in.
Is this a more difficult point in the painting, because when I get started, like if I had to start at this point, I'd be hard to stay with it. I like to get into the nitty-gritty detail of it.
Right, and this, I don't know if this is the hardest part. I think the hardest part is the final detail.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the basic shapes and the basic values in is very important, and we do that early. But getting those skin tones right, and the hair, and the eyes, and the mouth, is the most difficult.
Now, working with oils, and I know that a lot of people work them because you can blend them so easily, much better than you can with the acrylic painting. But I'm a pastel artist, so it's hard for me to even understand how you go through that blending process to get it into the oils, which I assume would be similar.
The process is, you have to be careful, because if you blend too much, you end up with mud. So you have to be very careful about how you do it. I like painting wet on wet, but depending on the piece, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I will go ahead and let the thing dry, cure for maybe a week or even longer, and then go back in. If I want to make sure that my colors are perfect and I don't have too much blending. But generally, I like working wet on wet.
So this takes quite a bit of time to complete an oil painting then, if you're
It
going
does.
through the drying process.
It does, and that's why most of my paintings are not done that way. But some of them are. They just have to be, because you can't get the right contrast and the right values otherwise.
Now, you have brought actually a work that is not a portrait work, but is more of a building, and demonstrates, I think I'd call more impressionistic, because we still see the images here, but you've added this little bit of a slant to it.
Yeah, this is impressionistic or expressive. This was a piece I did down in McCollum City, and this was just a old truck that had been parked there, covered with weeds for many years, and the building had been abandoned many years ago. I'm not a realist artist. I admire those that are, but I like to kind of get the feeling out of it a little bit more than trying to make it become a photograph. And so I try to make my buildings a little distorted, maybe add a little color that you wouldn't normally see, and it's just an opportunity to bring a little more life to it.
What I also love about it is when you have the abstraction to it, it allows the viewer to kind of bring even more of themselves to it in the interpretation of what they're seeing as well.
Absolutely. Yes, I get lots of comments, different kinds of comments from people about, like for instance, this green across the bottom. Is it grass, or is it a reflection, or what is it? And I like that. I like to get reaction from people. Even if they're negative, it's a reaction. I'd much rather have a negative reaction than somebody just pass it by and not see it at all.
Doesn't capture at least some interest.
Absolutely.
So another that we see a lot of these on your walls, and I'm just going to briefly talk about them, which are your abstracts. And one of the things that strikes me is that we see a lot of people that are doing this pouring process. And these have that look to them, but they're not pours. These are actually working with your oils on the canvas with a brush.
Right. I do a lot of brush work. I like to use a brush called a rigger, which is a very thin brush, and I use that in a lot of my abstract work. I also use a palette knife a lot, and I'm able to get expression, I think, quicker and easier doing that than with a large brush. But I use the whole thing. I use everything I got in my box at some time or another.
Now the palette knife, for those who may be viewing this and not know exactly what that is, can you kind of describe how that's different from the brush?
It is a type of knife that has lots of different angles. There are lots of different styles available, from diamond shape to flat or square, or all kinds of things. But it's a little stiffer, and it's got a very sharp edge, and you just scrape the paint and then apply it, and it works very quickly. It's a fast way to paint, and I can do a sketch of a face in 2 or 3 minutes using a palette knife.
Using a palette knife. I once tried using a palette knife and oil, and I got so frustrated with it. And part of it is because it does apply the paint thicker, and so it takes forever for it to dry. At least when I was 16, I thought it was forever. So you would have to be walking away from it for a period of time when you're using it, don't you?
You do sometimes. Sometimes you need to thin the paint. If you thin the paint, it goes on much easier, and it dries a little faster. But I've got a rooster over here that I did the whole thing in one sitting, and the background was done with a brush, but the whole rooster was done with palette knife, and it was done pretty quickly and in one setting.
Now, see, that was the perfect segue, because that was the next one we were going to talk about.
Okay.
The rooster catches everyone's eye when they walk into your studio, and so it is unique to some of the other things you do, but you can also see your style in it as well. And as you said, so this has, I assume, some type of a wash that was on it first, or undercoating of some type in the back?
Yeah, I toned the canvas with just a light blue wash, and then went over it with ultramarine blue with a brush, and then I went ahead and just did the white and the other colors with a palette knife.
And you just captured that rooster.
Well, the hard part of working with roosters is they're a terrible model. They won't hold a pose at all. So you have to work quickly with them.
Yeah, I have this problem at my house because I have a chicken coop and I have all these roosters. And so I kind of was looking at the other day, and I thought, I know I don't have any eggs because they're all roosters. But the thing is that it's not that they're all rooster, they're all 10.
Well,
that certainly makes it so that they don't lay eggs.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so very much for your time today, and I absolutely love coming in and seeing the variety of the ways that you use oil.
Thank you.
It is really interesting, and I always love to see a work in progress, and I will be anxious to come back and see this one.
Great, thank you. Come back anytime.
Thank you. So now we're going to go on and meet yet another artist, and we are now at the studio of Denise Martin. Now this is truly a unique experience here at the Newcastle Packing Shed because Denise does absolutely one-of-a-kind quilts. And I have always loved this process because I grew up in a farming community where the women would get together and make quilts. And I'm always amazed the level of quilting that we get with Denise's work. Thank you so very much for having us here today.
You're welcome. It's an honor.
So let's start out because you have some absolutely amazing pieces that we have that just surround us as soon as we walk into your studio. And being that little 4-H girl and remembering having to take out all those stitches when I made mistakes, this is almost like a horror story as I come walking in. But I know that it is just such an incredible expression of art, and you show that.
Well, I came from an art background. Had some wonderful instructors over the years, but at some point I kind of just got unchallenged by it. So I'd always sewn, I'd always loved textiles. I like the textural quality.
Mm-hmm.
I like to have my hands more involved, and I thought I couldn't do it because I wasn't really good at math. But we had a wonderful quilt store open in Auburn, and I learned the fundamentals, which is probably what you learn in 4-H. But at some point, I needed to branch off and bring more artistry into it. So I started what I call, and is called thread painting, kind of combined with applique. So between those two things, I put together pieces that I hope tell a story.
Oh, they absolutely do. But let's back up a little bit. Thread making, is that painting? So explain that to me because I'm unfamiliar with that.
So if you sew enough lines of thread on your sewing machine, it eventually creates color and texture. And
Okay.
so like in a road, if I sew enough black lines, eventually it will start, and with a yellow center stripe, it will start to look like a road.
Uh-huh.
So there's no painting involved, but you're using thread to paint to create color and texture.
Okay, so now the ones that we see here with the roads, that's actually thread that goes through there as opposed to just pieces of fabric that have been put in place.
Correct.
Oh, wow.
Correct. Yeah.
That just is absolutely amazing. And then you can see as this road and the bottom one comes winding down, you've actually introduced other colors of thread.
Right, you can do that, or you can applique and then paint on your applique. So an applique would be another piece of fabric that's added to the piece, and then you can thread paint on that. So you don't have to sew so much to create a color.
Now also then with your sky that you can see the intricate swirls and everything that you've done here, is that part of this thread painting that you're talking about too, or is that a different process?
No, actually that would probably be just quilting. So quilting is actually sewing three pieces together.
Okay.
The back, the batting, and the front. And because that's quilting, depends on what I have as the top piece, but I really wanted to create movement. And just if you've ever been in the Southwest, the sky changes all the time, and I just thought that's a road trip through the Southwest. Maybe in the 60s.
Oh, it definitely is in the 60s. But you have just caught, like with the sun on it and just what it does in the clouds. And now is that the last step, is the quilting process then?
Well, normally if you're putting together a quilt, you'll piece the smaller pieces together and then sandwich them in the back, the batting, and the top, and quilt that. But this is actually something where I generally start with the background, and then I start adding by applique and sewing layers, trying to create depth, trying to create movement, and trying to create a dynamism so they all three work together. That was the first one that I did. That was the second, and To My Back is the third. I really felt like it was interesting to work through some of the dynamics of how to make a road.
Oh, I think that you've absolutely captured it. I'm not, now that you've explained it to me, I'm even more in awe of what you've done. I also love this. I assume this is a map of California that you've done over here, and
It
that
is.
is a wonderful depiction of this.
So a lot of people think quilting is about sewing little squares together. It's actually not. I mean, it can be, but that would be incredibly boring for most people, including myself. And so you just end up sewing little strips, and it doesn't mean anything, and then you cut it apart and reassemble it, and cut it apart and reassemble it. So I have been traveling up and down the state of California for about 40 years. And I had this kind of a wild, small piecing things going on, and I took a AAA map of California, and I superimposed it, my quilted piece on top of it, and I sewed almost every single road in California. And then I washed all the map away as much as I could, and then I just started adding Nevada, which is kind of depicted by the brown dry colors.
You have so depicted
and then
Nevada.
the ocean with some of the
Sorry.
some of the oceany things.
I love the ocean.
Yeah. I really had a fun time, but people aren't sure what to do with that map. But this quilt, but if you know California, it's pretty obvious.
Yes. Now you have a piece here in front of us that you're working on, and so this kind of shows a little bit of the steps that you've done. And one of the things that I always love to look is actually the back sides. What do we got? So
really?
Yes.
Okay.
So you actually do on the back as well, because I always think that these are works as part of this piece as well. So this is a continuation of the fabrics that you've used here in the front.
Not really.
No. So
no.
this is a different backing.
This is just scrap,
Mm-hmm.
and this is just scrap, and it's. I don't intend for anybody ever to see the back.
this.
There would not be any point because it's. I think part of what I'm trying to do, and it gets away from maybe the 4-H or people who had the opportunity to have home ec, that I don't need my back to be as neat
No
and
kidding.
perfect.
You mean the judging
So-
where they turn it over and
Exactly,
they go,
and every
okay.
little stitch is in the right place. Temperamentally, that doesn't work for me, so I don't intend anybody to see the back.
You know what's also is that what kind of turned me off of quilting was when the math that you were talking about.
Yeah.
But also was then getting it ironed and pressed so it would lay absolutely perfect. And when I started reading and going through all these steps, I'm just going, oh, this is just way too complicated. And you've taken it at even another step beyond that, which is, I'm so impressed.
Well, I want to create movement, visual, and one thing I often do I'll put my final piece around a wooden frame like you would put a canvas around, and then I'll put it up in the window. So the light comes through and it creates, a glow. I guess would be the word, and I really like that. I think it's sad that some of that beautiful mastery in craftsmanship people were taught with intimidated so many of us, because working with fabric is very forgiving. I mean, you may have to unsew, but if you're going to be a quilt artist, you can just make something that's a problem and turn it into an asset, and you don't have to worry about all those perfectionist type problems that discourage so many of us.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to close today. I want to thank you so much. You definitely show the passion of what you do in your work, but also in how you talk about it. I can tell you really love this.
I do. Thank you.
And your work is beautiful. Thank you so very much.